Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are strapping on the intellectual scuba gear. We're descending into a topic that has these profound implications, not just for health, but for our entire understanding of self. We are diving into what our source material calls the literal biological architecture of the mind-body connection. And we're not talking about metaphor here. This is chemistry, it's real-time neuroscience, and it's cellular signaling.
That's exactly right. For far too long, the link between our psychological state and our physical health has been sort of treated as anecdotal, soft science. Our mission in this deep dive is to really dissect the hard evidence. We want to get into the source material detailing what we're calling the psychosomatic bridge.
Psychosomatic bridge, okay.
Yeah, we want to understand the exact biochemical mechanism by which a psychological expectation translates into a physiological reality. And crucially, we're going to explore how the demonstrated power of this connection it fundamentally challenges the core methodologies and the assumptions of modern medicine.
So we're looking for the hidden machinery, the stuff that dictates healing and harm inside our own bodies.
That's the goal.
Okay, let's unpack this core concept right away. The term psychosomatic, it's everywhere, but it's often, misunderstood. We need a precise definition. If it's not metaphorical, what is the scientific definition we're working with?
Well, the word itself, as you know, it comes from the Greek psyche for mind and soma for body. But when we define it scientifically, we're talking about the physical manifestation of psychological processes.
Yeah.
It's the objective, measurable translation of mental instructions. You can think of them as software signals.
Software signals.
Right, and those get translated into biological hardware events. The mind is, in essence, a chemical delivery system. It broadcasts instructions.
Wow. Okay, so that immediately shifts the mind from being this passive recipient of physical distress to an active regulator, an active chemical producer. It suggests that health and disease are fundamentally influenced by, maybe even originating from, an internal directive.
Precisely. And the central revelation, the thing connecting all of our sources, is that this translation mechanism is governed by a single, very powerful engine, the unified anticipatory system.
A unified anticipatory system.
Yes. This is a constant neurological mechanism. It's operating 24/7, and its sole purpose is prediction. It's constantly scanning the environment, both internal, like your blood sugar levels or inflammation markers, and external, like social cues or perceived threats.
Yeah.
And its job is to predict future physiological needs and preemptively adjust the body's chemistry to meet those predictions.
So the placebo effect and the nocebo effect, these are the positive and negative outcomes that scientists normally just treat as experimental noise. They aren't separate, mysterious phenomena at all.
Not at all.
They're just two predictable, measurable outputs of this one engine.
Exactly. They are two sides of the same biological coin, and they operate entirely on the currency of expectation. If the system anticipates benefit or safety or repair, it generates a safety signal. That's the positive output, the placebo effect.
And this isn't just a feeling, right?
No, it's not just a feeling. The brain activates specific neural pathways in areas like the rostral anterior cingulate cortex, and it releases these highly beneficial endogenous chemicals.
Okay, so what are the key chemical players, the ones that actually perform the physical healing?
We're talking about the body's own pharmacy. It's primarily endorphins and dopamine. Endorphins are potent, naturally occurring opioids. They physically modulate your pain symptoms and create a sense of well-being. And dopamine, that reinforces the neural pathway. It's essentially your brain saying, hey, this expectation worked, remember this ritual? And together they initiate these critical repair cascades at the cellular level, they reduce inflammation, and they calm the entire system down.
That's the positive chemical response. But the system is dual purpose. The darker output, the nocebo effect, is when harm or threat is anticipated.
And that's the systemic threat signal. If that unified anticipatory system predicts harm or failure or just sustained stress, the brain immediately triggers the master stress regulator, the HPA axis.
The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, let's not gloss over that. That's the core of the entire stress system, isn't it?
The absolute core.
So what specifically does HPA activation do to the body's hardware?
It's a chain reaction. The hypothalamus releases a hormone that signals the pituitary gland to release another hormone, which finally signals the adrenal glands to pump out cortisol. Cortisol's job is to mobilize energy and suppress any non-essential functions like digestion and, crucially, long-term immune repair. But in the nocebo response, the key differentiator, the specific neurochemical ingredient that facilitates the negative experience, is the release of cholecystokinin. or CCK.
CCK. We always hear about cortisol and stress, but CCK is the detail that really connects that psychological expectation to, well, to acute physical suffering. Why is CCK the critical difference maker here?
CCK is fascinating. I mean,
Right.
it's mostly known as a gut hormone. It helps regulate digestion. But it's also synthesized in the central nervous system, particularly in the pathways that are involved in fear and anxiety. And critically, CCK acts as a powerful facilitator for the transmission of pain and anxiety throughout the entire nervous system. It directly antagonizes the beneficial opioid receptors that your endorphins would normally activate.
Hold on. So when the anticipatory system broadcasts a threat signal, it doesn't just release general stress hormones. It releases a specific neurochemical, CCK, that is designed to actively amplify the perception of distress and pain.
That's it, exactly. It acts like a neurochemical megaphone. It ensures that whatever symptoms you're experiencing or even just anticipating you might experience are felt more intensely. So the body isn't just reflecting distress, it's actively flooding its own hardware with chemicals that are designed to increase pain sensitivity and heighten anxiety. It makes that threat signal immediate and impossible to ignore. And this proactive chemical hostility, that is the very definition of the nocebo effect.
This dual mechanism, the one that generates both hope and fear, it brings us to the first major conceptual challenge from our sources. The system isn't neutral, not even close.
Not at all. It is fundamentally imbalanced.
And this reveals what the research calls the negativity bias in biology. It confirms the whole anticipatory system is heavily weighted toward negative outcomes.
This bias is, I think, one of the most structurally important findings in this whole area. Studies comparing the two effects show that the nocebo response, that threat signal, it forms faster, it's triggered by weaker stimuli, and, crucially, it is significantly harder to extinguish or unlearn than the placebo effect.
So our central nervous system is literally built to prioritize threat perception over reward recognition.
It's a profound biological asymmetry.
I can see the evolutionary logic, but its implications for modern life are they're pervasive. It means our ancient wiring is constantly tipping the scales against optimism. It forces us to expend conscious energy just to maintain a state of basic emotional and physiological equilibrium.
That is the evolutionary imperative in action. I mean, if we apply survival logic and a cost-benefit analysis, the reason for this asymmetry becomes irrefutable. Think about the biological trade-off. The cost of ignoring a real threat, missing the sign of a poisonous food, or failing to remember a site of injury is potentially death. That's an infinite cost.
Right.
But on the other hand, the benefit you get from remembering a minor feel-good reward, like a slight improvement in well-being from some new berry you found, it's minor.
So if the body has to choose between a false positive, a perceived threat that isn't real, and a false negative missing a real threat.
It will always choose the false positive, always. Survival demanded an over-reliance on threat memory and threat anticipation. The system prioritizes immediate, persistent recall of what could kill us. And so the body prioritizes threat signals, making the nocebo effect a far more immediate, persistent, and structurally ingrained biological force.
But doesn't this mean that in our modern, less immediately threatening environment where our threats are, chronic stress, financial pressure, negative news cycles, not saber-toothed tigers, our survival advantage becomes a massive wellness disadvantage? We've basically traded immediate safety for chronic internal conflict.
That is the tragic trade-off.
Yeah.
It really is. The ancient system, designed to save us from acute danger, is now being constantly activated by these chronic, non-lethal psychological stressors. And that state of hypervigilance, where the nocebo is easily triggered and so hard to switch off, that generates the sustained internal chemical friction that drives modern inflammatory diseases. This is why the source material stresses that managing that nocebo response isn't some secondary wellness task. It must be actively and intentionally managed by your conscious mind just to achieve baseline health. You are fighting millions of years of evolutionary bias simply to stay calm.
It really provides a sobering perspective on something like anxiety. Anxiety isn't just a mental state, it is the natural default chemical output of a system designed to err on the side of terror.
It's the biological memory demanding to stay awake, and the clinical observation reinforces this. When researchers try to extinguish a placebo response by showing the treatment is inert, the response usually fades pretty quickly. But extinguishing a nocebo response, that can take significantly longer. Sometimes it requires sustained, conscious effort or even additional pharmacological intervention because that threat memory has been structurally embedded so much deeper into the nervous system. The lesson is really clear. Harm is easier to teach the body than healing.
Okay, now that we understand this macro-level neurological bias, let's zoom in. Let's go dramatically down to the level where these psychological instructions, the safety signal or the threat signal, are actually executed. We need to get a detailed look at the cellular microenvironment.
This is maybe the most tangible part of the entire psychosomatic bridge. Every single one of the trillions of cells in your body lives within this highly complex, dynamic bath of fluids and signaling molecules. We call it the microenvironment.
A bath for our cells.
Yeah, and it's not static. It's a localized ecosystem of hormones, nutrients, waste products, immune factors, neurotransmitters. Think of it as the cell's hyperlocal weather system. And this weather dictates everything. Whether the cell can perform routine maintenance, whether it repairs DNA damage, whether it reproduces normally, or whether it becomes pathological.
And the crucial connection here is that our mental state acts as the primary high-level weather controller. It's instantly modifying the components of that bath. We're talking about modulation via mental signaling.
Yes, the mind-body axis acts as a primary chemical regulator of this environment. It's issuing instructions that change the terrain itself. So when the anticipatory system is generating a health signaling state, the placebo output, it creates a microenvironment rich in repair hormones, anti-inflammatory markers, and those endogenous opioid peptides. It promotes optimal conditions, moderate temperature, clear signals, and all the resources for growth and repair.
But the nocebo state, the disease signaling, that's what generates a hostile, disruptive environment. What specific chemical components flood the microenvironment when that threat signal is persistent?
The primary disruptive elements are sustained, high levels of stress hormones, particularly cortisol, and the highly potent pro-inflammatory cytokines. Cytokines, things like interleukin-6 or IL-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, they are the chemical instructions for conflict. They tell the cells to prepare for damage, for infection, for combat. This is the physiological equivalent of a persistent, violent thunderstorm.
So if a cell is trying to conduct routine maintenance, repair its DNA, or, replace necessary proteins while it's being bathed in this high concentration of cortisol and pro-inflammatory cytokines, its ability to function normally is severely compromised. How does this chemical environment actively inhibit repair?
Well, cortisol, when it's sustained at high levels, is catabolic. It breaks things down. It inhibits the expression of genes required for long-term protein synthesis and structural maintenance. It shunts energy away from repair and toward immediate vigilance. At the same time, the chronic presence of pro-inflammatory cytokines creates what scientists call oxidative stress. And this stress damages cellular machinery and DNA faster than the cell can repair it. It shifts the cell's equilibrium from maintenance and repair toward a persistent state of defense and dysfunction.
And here is where chronic psychological states merge into objective, documented structural disease. This is the consequence of chronic disruption and pathogenesis.
Exactly. If this state of negative mental signaling persists for months or years, if that chemical weather remains stormy, the cells are forced into a state of persistent stress and defense. And this persistent cellular stress isn't just associated with disease. It is often the direct, necessary precursor to a whole host of pathologies, things like autoimmune conditions, metabolic disorders, and critically structural diseases.
You mentioned a specific and pretty profound example in the sources, connecting chronic negative expectation directly to a structural disease risk, which is something often considered completely outside the realm of the mind.
Yes, the source material is explicit in linking chronic disruption to the risk of malignant cell proliferation. A chronically inflamed terrain, a microenvironment persistently flooded with stress hormones and cytokines, can actively encourage malignant cell proliferation.
That is a terrifying and powerful statement.
It is. It suggests that the sustained psychological threat signal doesn't just make you feel sick. It actively contributes to generating the specific hostile chemical conditions that are required for uncontrolled cellular growth. The mind, through chronic threat signaling, can unintentionally create a hospitable habitat for serious structural disease, like certain types of cancer.
The implication is that psychological vigilance, when it's maintained without cause, physically corrodes our biological machinery. It's like a self-inflicted chemical burn over time.
It forces us to redefine what a healthy environment even means, right down to the microscopic level. The health of that cellular bath is as critical as any nutrient supply, and our anticipatory system is the chief architect of its composition.
Okay, so having established this robust biological machinery of the psychosomatic bridge, we now face a paradox. If this system is so powerful, why has the medical establishment historically sidelined it? And the critique seems to center on the methodology of the gold standard of research, the randomized controlled trial, the RCT.
The critique is fundamental, yeah. It targets the subtraction method flaw. Standard RCTs are designed purely to isolate the chemical power of a novel drug. They compare the improvement rate of the medicine group to the improvement rate of the placebo group, but the arithmetic they use, it inherently obscures and minimizes the total healing power that's mobilized by the patient's own expectation.
Let's walk through the exact calculation that hides this truth.
It's almost a statistical sleight of hand. Let's say the medicine group achieves 70% clinical improvement. The placebo group achieves 40% improvement, purely through the ritual and expectation. Researchers then subtract the 40% from the 70% and declare the drug's true efficacy to be 30%. That 40% is labeled the placebo effect, and it's treated as a statistical artifact, a nuisance factor to be eliminated,
Instead of what it really is.
instead of the true biological power of the patient's own anticipatory system.
But hold on a second. From a purely pharmacological perspective, isn't it logical to subtract the placebo? I mean, if we are testing the drug's physical mechanism, we should only care about the mechanism that the drug brings to the table, right? Why should medicine try to quantify something it can't manufacture or standardize or put in a bottle?
And that is the core defense of the current paradigm, but it commits an error of scale. By defining efficacy solely based on the chemical difference between the drug and the placebo, we fail to define the total therapeutic effect that's delivered to the patient. We're ignoring the 40% of genuine objective healing capacity that the patient mobilized just through the ritual of treatment and positive expectation.
So we're confusing the compound's chemical novelty with its total clinical value.
Exactly. The sources argue that medicine has a responsibility to understand and harness the entire healing process, not just the easily monetized chemical part.
And that failure to define the total therapeutic context, that's the intellectual blind spot. To remedy this flaw, our sources insist on the absolute necessity of establishing 3 foundational baseline studies, which are almost universally overlooked. They represent the missing data points that would fundamentally change how we evaluate drugs.
Yes, to understand the true power of the mind-body connection, you have to isolate 3 distinct factors that contribute to recovery.
Okay, let's start with the first one, the nothing study.
This is the purest baseline you can get. You must have a group of patients who receive nothing. No pill, no consultation, no white coat, no ritual. And they're told nothing. This establishes the true, unbiased baseline for pure natural recovery, or the natural history of the disease. If 15% of people recover spontaneously just by the passage of time, we have to know that number. Otherwise, we inflate the perceived success of both the placebo and the drug groups. Without the nothing study, we can't accurately attribute any success to the intervention itself.
That makes perfect sense. If you don't know the rate of spontaneous remission, you don't know what you're actually measuring. What's the second essential baseline?
The second is the placebo alone study. Here, you use 2 separate groups, and both receive identical placebo treatments. The purpose is to establish the baseline success rate of the medical ritual itself. This isolates the value of all the nonspecific elements: the doctor's attention, the confidence in the system, the physical act of taking a pill, the therapeutic communication. This is measuring the capacity of the safety signal that's generated by the entire therapeutic context.
Which isolates the power of the social contract and the belief system, but it removes the chemical confounding factor. And the third necessary study.
The third is a direct comparison, the nothing versus placebo study. You compare the results of the nothing study directly against the placebo alone study. The difference between those 2 groups, for example, if the nothing group has a 15% recovery rate and the placebo group has a 40% recovery rate, that difference isolates the specific, quantifiable therapeutic value derived solely from the ritual. That 25% difference is the objective, measurable power of expectation alone.
The implication here is just staggering. By failing to conduct these 3 studies and instead starting the calculation by comparing the drug to the ritual, to the placebo, medicine is effectively misattributing a massive, measurable biological phenomenon, the ritual value, to the chemical compound alone. The pill gets the credit for the power of the mind it merely triggered.
It's an error of quantification, and it stems from a materialistic bias. We've defined efficacy based on a chemical difference because that's what we can patent. And this underestimation is why the scientific community still struggles to fully integrate the psychosomatic bridge into formalized therapeutic models, despite the overwhelming evidence of its power.
So, if the subtraction method obscures the positive power of expectation, the next section of our source material offers the ultimate, most dramatic proof of the necessity of expectation. This is the hidden treatment model, and its findings just flip the entire drug efficacy conversation right on its head.
This model is, I would argue, the scientifically purest way to assess the power of medicine. It's designed to isolate the physical power of the drug, the sheer chemical hardware, from the psychological power, the patient's mental software. It's the closest we can get to giving a drug to a biological automaton.
How is this procedure actually done? How do you ensure the patient remains truly unaware of the treatment?
The design is very carefully controlled to eliminate that safety signal. The patient receives a real, effective medicine, but without their awareness. In many pain trials, this is done via a computer-controlled intravenous pump. It delivers the dose secretly or based on a pre-programmed schedule. The key is to maintain a state of neutral ignorance or, more often, a negative expectancy. So the patient believes they are not yet receiving medication, or maybe they think they're just getting saline.
The anticipatory system is shut out.
It's prevented from actively assisting the drug.
And this is where it gets really interesting. What happens to the efficacy of powerful drugs when the mind is included in and assisting?
The findings are consistent and, frankly, they should reshape pharmacology. Drugs are dramatically less effective when the patient does not know they are receiving them. We are talking about a massive, measurable clinical gap between open and hidden administration.
Let's anchor this with a specific data point. The one from the postoperative pain trials is it's incredible.
The results are astounding. In trials involving severe, acute postoperative pain, the kind of pain that requires the strongest interventions, the hidden groups, the ones receiving morphine unaware, they consistently required 50% more morphine to achieve the same level of pain relief as the open groups, who knew the doctor was administering the dose.
50% more. That means half of the effective dose of one of the world's most powerful opioids was attributable not to the chemical itself, but to the patient's expectation and the subsequent release of their own endogenous painkillers. That is not a subtle effect. That is the mind acting as a co-pharmacist.
It's a major biological force that we just can't ignore. When the patient is unaware of treatment, their anticipatory system, thanks to that evolutionary negativity bias we talked about, it defaults to status quo or threat mode. It starts producing internal resistance. They continue to generate internal stress chemicals, primarily cortisol, and crucially that pain-amplifying neurochemical, CCK.
And this introduces a concept we absolutely have to internalize: biological friction.
Precisely. Biological friction is the internal resistance the drug must overcome. The chemical compound isn't operating in a neutral environment. It is fighting an active, internal chemical war. The cortisol and CCK are actively dampening the drug's effectiveness by inhibiting natural opioid pathways or constricting vascular flow. The drug has to first neutralize the body's own self-generated negative chemistry before it can even begin its intended action.
Let me just pause on the practical implication of that 50% drop. If this data holds true across hospital settings, every time a highly effective painkiller is given in an impersonal, automated way, or maybe if a patient is drowsy and unaware, the healthcare system is effectively wasting half the resource and delaying relief simply because they failed to engage the anticipatory system.
That is the staggering reality this model reveals. It exposes the pure physical floor of medical science. It demonstrates what a chemical compound does to human hardware when the psychological software is actively unhelpful.
Yeah.
And for perceptual conditions, particularly pain, anxiety, and things heavily mediated by the nervous system, the efficacy floor can drop by 60 to 80% in some cases.
A reduction of up to 80%. That is the critical takeaway here. It means the medicine's primary role is often not to initiate healing, but to act as a powerful signal enhancer for a mind-body system that's already trying to heal. But only if the mind is signaled to give that permission. The drug is the key, but expectation is the engine.
It forces us to ask whether we are treating the disease or simply enhancing the body's innate capacity to treat itself, using the drug as a powerful suggestion.
The profound findings of the hidden treatment model, they necessitate a deeper understanding of the scientific discipline that formalized this link. The link between the mind, the nervous system, and the body's defense mechanisms. Psychoneuroimmunology, or PNI. PNI is the scientific bridge that confirms the chemical communication highways actually exist.
PNI is vital because it shifts the discussion from effects to measurable anatomy. It demonstrates the hardwired links between consciousness and disease defense. Researchers have definitively proven that immune cells, your white blood cells, the core of your defense system, they possess receptors for neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine.
So they literally have receptors that can pick up signals broadcast by the brain's mood and stress centers.
Exactly. Your thoughts and your emotions, they aren't just abstract entities. They are chemical commands delivered directly to your disease-fighting mechanisms. And this constant, direct communication allows for a powerful phenomenon known as conditioned immunomodulation.
This sounds like Pavlov for the immune system. How does this training effect demonstrate that direct link between belief and defensive chemistry?
The famous experiments are precisely patterned on Pavlov, yeah.
Yeah.
Researchers paired a novel, harmless cue like a specific flavor or found, with an immunosuppressive drug. Over time, the immune system learned to associate the flavor or the sound with the immunosuppression. And when the drug was withdrawn and only the harmless cue was administered, the body's immune response was suppressed anyway.
Wow.
It's a profound reproducible link. The immune system can be trained to respond to a psychological cue, confirming that the mind can directly regulate defensive chemistry.
Okay, so if the nocebo effect is the mechanism by which chronic negative states generate inflammatory overload and tissue degradation, then the placebo effect must be its exact opposing force. It must be the intentional biological solution.
It is the biological solution. The source material defines the placebo effect as the necessary biological mechanism used to recode a system damaged by chronic nocebo signaling. Because the placebo effect is the precise physiological inverse of the nocebo effect. It's switching from HPA activation, cortisol, and CCK release to endorphin and dopamine release.
Yep.
It functions as the direct biological antidote to illnesses caused by that chronic threat path.
So how does the positive expectation, the healing ritual, actually initiate physical repair? Let's detail the step-by-step process of that systemic energy shift.
A powerful healing ritual. The verbal assurance from a doctor, the act of taking a medicine, the expectation of a cure functions as a powerful overriding biological safety signal. This signal instantly engages the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode. And when the parasympathetic system takes over, it immediately begins to suppress the HPA axis. It halts that torrent of cortisol and pro-inflammatory chemicals.
So it's not just a subtle calm, it's an active suppression of the conflict chemistry.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this process removes the physiological brake on healing. All the energy the body was spending on hypervigilance, defense, and cortisol production, which is incredibly metabolically expensive, is instantly redirected. It's sent toward essential functions: robust immune regulation, tissue repair, digestion, and regeneration. It's a systemic energy shift that flips the cellular weather from disruptive conflict to restorative maintenance, allowing the innate healing mechanisms of the body to finally operate unimpeded.
Understanding this depth of control forces us to consider the ultimate limits and the profound potential of the mind-body connection. We have to start with the nuance here, particularly the distinction between functional versus structural disorders.
This distinction is critical to maintain intellectual rigor. In functional disorders like irritable bowel syndrome or chronic tension headaches or fibromyalgia, the physical hardware is intact, but the signaling pathways are malfunctioning. The software is just generating error messages. In these cases, the mind-body connection can offer a genuine, sustained cure simply by successfully resetting those signals and restoring internal equilibrium. However, the placebo effect, generated by the mind, typically cannot repair profound structural hardware damage that the brain did not initiate. Things like a severe compound fracture or a fully expressed, deeply embedded genetic mutation.
But even in those structural cases, the mind isn't rendered useless, is it? If we can optimize the internal terrain, that has to have systemic benefits. And that leads us to the potential beyond repair and the concept of epigenetic potential.
Absolutely. The mind-body system acts as a powerful adjunctive therapy, even in systemic structural diseases like carcinomas or deep-seated autoimmune conditions. The mind can dramatically optimize the healing environment by persistently suppressing inflammation and stress hormones. This shifts the cellular microenvironment, making it less hospitable to disease progression. And this optimization is where the cutting-edge research on epigenetics comes into play.
How deep can this influence go? I mean, can sustained positive signaling truly affect genetic outcomes, or is that too large a claim?
The emerging research suggests a powerful, though indirect, influence. Epigenetics refers to changes in gene expression, whether a gene is turned on or turned off, without altering the underlying DNA sequence. And studies suggest that by modulating the cellular terrain, that chemical bath and the surrounding bioelectric field, the mind-body connection can influence epigenetics. The bioelectric field, the electrical cues surrounding the cells, is directly influenced by our neurological signals.
So the mind is altering the environmental conditions that influence which genes are actively expressing themselves. What's the nuanced insight here regarding diseases like cancer?
The nuance is crucial. The mind may not be able to delete a mutation that is part of the inherent genetic code, But by changing the persistent environment, by flooding the terrain with anti-inflammatory rather than pro-inflammatory cues, it could potentially suppress the expression of malignant genes or alter the electrical cues that are actively driving uncontrolled growth or tissue degradation. The mind changes the operational parameters of the genes themselves. It changes the conversation the cells are having with the environment.
This entire body of evidence really culminates in a profound philosophical and practical insight, the concept of cognitive sovereignty.
This is the practical philosophical takeaway. The profound reality highlighted by the P&I research in the hidden treatment model is the immense innate chemical and physiological power we possess over our own biology. And yet, the current state of affairs is that most individuals feel they require external authority. They need permission granted by a doctor, a drug, a formal diagnosis to trigger their own healing mechanisms.
We outsource the safety signal. We need a white coat to give us the chemical command to release our own endorphins.
And cognitive sovereignty is the necessary antidote to that surrender. It is defined as the intentional, conscious broadcasting of safety signals to one's own nervous system. It's about actively reclaiming that internal authority over the anticipatory system. It requires recognizing that the placebo effect is a genuine biological resource that you own. It's something that can be activated intentionally, independent of external ritual.
And this intentional activation is made urgent by the concept of biological memory, right? Because the nocebo is so easily formed and so difficult to extinguish, early conscious intervention is key.
That's the critical practical lesson. Because the nervous system and the cellular microenvironment possess a deep and persistent biological memory, the duration of a chronic negative state, a nocebo effect, is extremely critical. This source material warns that the longer a chronic threat state persists, the more structurally difficult it is to unwind those neural pathways and reverse the cellular damage. So consciously activating the placebo effect early broadcasting, that safety signal through mindfulness, ritual, positive self-talk, is vital for mitigating harm. It's about preventing a temporary negative state from being etched into permanent chronic biological memory. It's a proactive defense against our own evolutionary design flaws. So to synthesize the core revelation of this psychosomatic bridge, the mind is not merely influencing health. It is the master chemical delivery system that dictates the basic biological terrain. The efficacy of virtually any physical intervention, from surgery recovery to drug response, is profoundly mediated by the patient's anticipation. And that anticipation acts either as a powerful signal enhancer or, through biological friction, a crippling source of internal resistance.
The single most shocking counterintuition we have to carry away from this is the empirical evidence of that biological friction, revealed by the hidden treatment model. When the mind is neutral or negative, the drug's power plummets by 50 to 80%. This mandates a revolutionary thought. The ritual, the belief, the intentional activation of the safety signal is not a gentle side effect. It is the essential, most powerful engine of biological recovery.
Our biology is evolutionarily weighted toward threat, which means we must actively fight that internal bias on a daily basis. Healing is, fundamentally, the act of recoding a chronic threat signal into a persistent safety signal, and that's done by leveraging our body's vast internal chemical pharmacy.
Which leaves us with a final provocative insight for you to consider. If the very definition of chronic illness involves the brain and body wiring themselves into a chronic threat state, a persistent, self-fulfilling biological memory, what specific daily ritual of conscious positive expectation is necessary to perpetually overwrite that powerful negative evolutionary bias and consistently affirm the state of cognitive sovereignty? The true future of medicine may lie in mastering the software we already possess.